I'm Larry Dinkins. I've been working 40 years with OMF International. And today I'd like to ask, how many of you have had formal training in using PowerPoint? How did you learn it? If you're like me, it was probably through trial and error and mostly errors. Most every presenter that I've heard has relied heavily on PowerPoint. And I've heard, I think, hundreds of PowerPoint presentations. Yet most people have received very little training in how to use PowerPoint effectively. Let's look a bit at the evolution of communication. Started out with cuneiform, you had the hieroglyphics, papyrus, and I'm over 65 years old, so I still remember blackboards. Now this generation never had the joy of hearing fingernails go down a blackboard and probably never have beaten out an eraser. And when I was a new missionary, my early missionary presentations were all slides. An expert communicator once said, before the advent of PowerPoint, missionaries had only one way to present their ministry visually, and that was through slideshows. I blame the public's bad perception of missionaries on a psychological malady called the missionary slideshow syndrome. This neurosis usually began by saying to some church member, "Oh, I hope you can come to my program tonight. I'll be showing our slideshow of," and then at that point, you have these neural synapses, they disconnect in their brain, and their eyes kind of roll back in their head, and they don't even hear the description of the delicious Thai food that we were preparing, or the neat Thai curios, or maybe how about the tribal clothes that I plan to wear. All they can think of is, danger, missionary slideshow, missionary slideshow. You'll probably have experienced this, but they usually start out with floral and they end with a sunset. You're always going to have a picture of the wing of a plane. Often they're out of focus, or maybe they got too much light in them. They're upside down, they're sideways. And the one I always experienced is I'd show a slide and I couldn't remember who the national was in that slide. How many have used one of these? These are called overhead projectors. And all I remember about them was how long it took to get all of those overheads prepared. Now, of course, we have laptops, and with them we have inherited PowerPoint. And the whole goal of these is to have a VA, a visual aid. Now, PowerPoint should be aiding us in our presentations, but often they end up hampering, especially if PowerPoint becomes the message. The presenter should be the focus, and particularly the presenter's message. PowerPoint should be an aid only, and it is a great aid if it is used properly, but if it's poorly used, it is mind-numbing. There are 500 million PowerPoint users in the world today. So there's 30 million presentations of PowerPoint being given each day. That adds up to about 1 billion slides being prepared and shown. And probably half of them are poorly done. My mom is 91 years old. But when she was a brand new wife, she had to prepare a Thanksgiving meal for a lot of people. At that point, she would get out her recipe cards. Then she would make a list, go to the grocery store, and then after that, when she got back home, she would lay out all of that food. Then the Dinkins women would work together in the kitchen, and the climactic moment was when a beautiful basted turkey would be brought out. Now, that's the same with PowerPoint. You've got to have planning, then you have the production, the pre-presentation, and then the presentation. So there's lots of time in preparation before you end up with that final product. And if you don't follow the planning, production, pre-presentation, and presentation, you'll probably end up very much like Mr. Bean in this picture. How many of you have felt like this during a long PowerPoint presentation? I know I have. Today I hope to remedy that problem of being a death by PowerPoint. We've all heard of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe we should start a PowerPoint Anonymous group. Hello, my name is Larry, and I'm a PowerPoint addict. We could even have a PowerPoint serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the slides I cannot change, courage to change the slides that I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Basically, we all need a detox program from poor PowerPoint presentations. Now, you know that you are a PowerPoint addict when your grocery list has bullet points. You forget how to use Microsoft Word. You know all 12 function keys of PowerPoint. Half of your talks are stolen PowerPoint slides from other PowerPoint presentations. You can't form words until you hit this clicker, and you send your wife a Valentine made with PowerPoint. Now, men are notorious for not asking directions. Would we all agree to that? Man, I would get lost without GPS. And I think many people get lost with PowerPoint because they're not adept at GPS. Many PowerPoint presenters get lost because they don't have a clear goal, a destination. And it's important to write not only your introduction out, but also your conclusion. Where do you want to take your audience? And then G and then P, we're going to have S, but P is the present situation, which is really your target audience. What is your current location? Who are you going to be talking to? What are their felt needs? And then, what are the steps to take to get to your destination? If I'm in Bangkok, I have to plan out. First I get in a van, then I transfer to a taxi, then I'm on the subway. So you have various steps you will take. You need to select your topics, and then the points that you want to make throughout your presentation. You should gather together supporting data, and this GPS, goal, present situation, and steps is going to be a lot better than GAH, which is grab and hope. Which means when you're in a time crunch, and I think all of us have done this, we grab a bunch of slides, and then we throw together some quick bullet points, and we hope that it makes sense. Of all the books and articles I've read about best practices with PowerPoint, this is the best advice I've really read. And that is to be clear. You want to be clear on your message. You want to have clear slides. You want to be clear on your delivery. And so you need to choose simple, focused slides that further the GPS that you have in mind. Elaborate slides can never make up for poor content. Design your slides carefully, not just decorating your talk with a bunch of window dressing, but having substantial, clear information. What is the difference between these two pictures? Well, I think you'll recognize one as a mainland Chinese, which is going to be very different than a Chinese that grows up in America. And that's very true of Thailand as well. The Thai that I know from Thailand and those that grew up in America are quite different. And yet, very often presenters from the West use the same PowerPoint in every country that they visit. And that's why you need to know your audience. Is it an older audience? Is it younger? What's their attention span? What's their background? So you need to do your homework on your target audience, and by doing so, you're going to have a major impact through that presentation. What becomes the focus for most presentations? I would say it's going to be the screen. Remember, you are the show, not the screen. Audiences should focus on you, and your focus should be on the audience and not on your notes or on your slides. This is a picture of Mad Dog Mattis, who was a general at the Defense Department, and he did away with PowerPoint presentations in the Defense Department. Now, can you guess why? Well, he was mad as a mad dog when he saw the pitiful PowerPoints that were used in the Defense Department. He said once, PowerPoint makes us stupid. Now, how does it make us stupid? Well, in his context, he was saying that out on the field of war, can you communicate to one another through PowerPoint? If Mad Dog had used a PowerPoint slide, I think it would be this slide here. It forces the audience to focus on the speaker. Far too often, PowerPoint competes with you as the speaker. Listeners get enamored with the presentation and they miss the message, and that was Mad Dog's concern. Rushing through a bunch of PowerPoint slides describing a complicated subject can make people feel that the subject is more simple than it actually is. It's better to slow down and use a black slide and speak directly to the audience in many cases. Or just limit your slides and have a number of black slides put up so that you can actually communicate face to face and really connect with your audience. What helps an audience to focus? Well, let me give you one practical tip. Which side of this screen should I be sitting on or standing on? Well, the key is that our information is going to start with me as I talk, and then the attention of the listener is going to move to the screen. And since we read from left to right, it's the easiest to follow in that fashion. Now in Israel, using Hebrew language, it's going to be just the opposite. I also suggest that you use a music stand and not a big pulpit. And that way you can use much more of your body language. So I encourage you, put on a black slide and then move around the stage and make the focus upon you as a speaker more than always on the PowerPoint slide. Now, let's talk about the production of slides themselves. I'm a typer. I've never been trained as a creative graphic artist. It seems to be too much work to do it that way. And so, unfortunately, I default to pre-made slides oftentimes. Yet, if you invest time in learning basic skills, you will find that making creative slides is easier than you think. Here's even a kindergartner that is able to be quite creative, and that's really a goal that I'm working towards. The eye gate is more powerful than the ear gate, and I found this picture on Google Images, and what an amazing thing Google Images is, because you got thousands to choose from. The goal is to substitute heavy text type slides with descriptions used through the medium of pictures or graphics. By the way, missionary PowerPoints often have loads of slides all introduced with "this is," and then the next slide they'll say "this is," and then they'll put in the description. So you could look at this and say, "This is a cat biting a dog." How much better to say, "A dog entered into the bedroom, and then suddenly the dog startled the cat, who leaped upon the dog." So let me encourage you to don't start every slide with "this is," just start right into your description. I'm the director of Simply the Story in Thailand, and I've been privileged to be involved with probably over 90 workshops. What's interesting is all of our trainings are oral. We have no PowerPoints, we have no notes, and sometimes this lasts for 5 days. And can I tell you, that is very refreshing. Now, why do we do it that way? Because story-based type training for preferred oral learners need to be more oral. Now, we as high literates, we can use PowerPoint, yet we should use more pictures and more stories. One picture can link to the next, and I can tell the story of taking a team to build a house through Habitat for Humanity in Thailand. And those pictures will link together and will end up being a very good storyline. A normal text slide is not retained for more than a few seconds. What sticks longer is a memorable illustration or story. Also, video clips can also tell a good story. The number one complaint that people have while watching a PowerPoint is a presenter who reads from his or her slides. Also, the font is often way too small. If lots of print content, then it's best to print out your notes or send your notes to the listeners by email ahead of time. Literate audiences can often read slides in microseconds. What they really want is for you to explain things that go beyond the print that is on the screen. PowerPoint is not Microsoft Word, yet many PowerPoint presenters use it like a word processor. They cram as much verbiage onto one slide as they possibly can, which means that the presenter is totally dependent on slides for most every word he gives in the presentation. I've seen PowerPoint presentations with 50 slides, all filled with text in small font, and the presenter reads from each one of them. An optimum number of slides would probably be 15 to 20 words on a slide. And if you're getting many more than that with very small font, then you're going to start losing your audience. What is wrong with the example on the top here? If you try to talk and at the same time have people read this type of a slide, they're going to end up remembering neither the slide nor what you are saying in your explanation. This one is much better. And why is that? It uses PowerPoint as it was designed to simply enhance your verbal message, which is going to expand on what that slide is all about. Most make slides full of text, or they often default to just bullet point slides. And now, there's nothing wrong with putting text on your slide, but there are better options. Between the slide on the left and on the right, what would you prefer? I would hope that you would prefer the one on that side. Communication effectiveness goes down as you increase the number of slides. One suggestion is to have a 10-20-30 rule, which means 10 slides for 20 minutes of presentation using 30-point font. And that works out to about 2 minutes for each slide. If the majority of slides are pictures that tell a compelling story, you end up with a very effective and compelling presentation. We can read at almost twice as fast as we can listen. So people read your bullet points very quickly, and then, unfortunately, they tune you out. And that's true especially if you have 2 to 3 bullet point slides in a row without a variety. Lists longer than 4 items are hard to remember, yet you regularly see slides with about 10 bullet points in a long list. Why do I call this presentation Death by PowerPoint? Because people get shot to death with so many bullet points. And personally, I would like to dodge those bullets. I have often been caught by my Thai students making spelling errors, but you know, Thai language has 65 letters, and it's very difficult to read. But it's doubly bad when it happens to me in English, and that's why we have what's called spell checker. How about choosing the font? 24-point font is the smallest you should use. 30 to 48-point font is an optimum size. Also, you want to stay with one basic font. Use a bold, simple font. Arial or Verdana are one of the best fonts to use. And what about special effects for fonts? Most any abrupt or surprising movement on a screen distracts from the message in the messenger. Throughout this PowerPoint, I've just used Appear for my animations. You can also use Dissolve, and like Appear, that is less jarring. And also, please be careful about so many transition type things that you use with slides when you go from one slide to another in transitions. If you use too many of those or they're too creative, then they can be jarring as well. What about stock templates? Well, my advice is not to use just what PowerPoint supplies, but to go to Google and search for what's called free PowerPoint templates. And also, I'd encourage you to have a master slide which can be consistent throughout your whole presentation. I'll just give you one word on graphs, and that's KISS. Keep it simple, saint. Graphics, charts, and visuals can be very helpful. This graph that you're looking at here even has the freezing point of beer on it. So avoid trying to do too much with just one slide. Let your slide build slowly with less data. Now, a few abbreviations may be okay in your PowerPoint presentation, but in my mission, OMF, I feel we tend to abuse abbreviations by overusing them. This is how many in my organization feel when we start to use so many abbreviations, and it's one of my pet peeves, putting way too many abbreviations on one slide. People try to save space on their slide by using abbreviations, but it can be very confusing. Don't you just love these cheesy effects that people put in their presentations? I think some people think, oh, I'll just throw in a few and my audience will love them. Well, guess what? They don't love them. Some presenters even add sound effects with these cheesy type effects. To me, this compares with a bunch of emojis that you get when you're going through somebody's text messages. If you use a bad font with these colors on, say, 50 slides, you could actually ruin people's eyes. A yellow font with a dark or black background stands out quite well. A dark background with white letters is easily read. Also, dyslexic people have problems reading slides that are just black letters on white background, and yet that's probably the most common way that we present text. Always check for watermarks. They're very distracting. You may need to actually purchase a picture if you feel you have to use it, yet usually you can find a substitute. The problem is that presenters often don't even see them when they are producing their PowerPoint. So I'm just trying to save you future embarrassment when these watermarks come up in your presentation. I have a friend named Jerome, and we worked together at the U.S. Center for World Mission. He told me, because he was at that particular location, that he had seen probably thousands of PowerPoint presentations. And he commented that often he found the technology didn't work right. Couldn't find the file, the wireless isn't working right, the video fails, I can't hear the audio. So one of the key things about getting ready for a presentation is to make sure that your ducks are in a row in a technology sense. Guess what happened to this guy? Yep, you're right. He did not back up his PowerPoint presentation. So make sure you put your presentation on a couple of flash drives. That's what I do. I put one in my wallet, I put another in my suitcase, and then it's important to back up your whole computer. I use a Mac, so I use what's called Time Machine to make sure I've got it backed up. The very best method probably is to load it all onto the cloud or onto the web, and then you know that it is safe. What about the difference between PowerPoint and Keynote? Both have pros and cons. Now, one thing about PowerPoint is you can get it free. Both of them have great templates. Both can add images, music, videos. PowerPoint can export into YouTube and import PDF quite directly, but that might be a problem with Keynote. But Keynote can import PowerPoint or export to make a PowerPoint. And so often I create in Keynote and then export it into PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint is best for beginners, those who are just starting out doing presentations. It's user-friendly. You don't need to be a graphic designer to do PowerPoint. Yet it is also sophisticated enough for high-end users, and that's why it's the most popular. Have you ever seen someone who is literally tethered to his computer through the whole presentation? Or even worse, he says, "Hey, in the back, next slide, please, next slide, please." Or have you ever seen a presenter who goes back and forth to his computer in order to hit the forward button? Well, I think it's obviously good to invest in a wireless remote. It's best to get one that has a laser feature with it as well. What happens if you hit presenter view in a PowerPoint or rehearse slideshow in Keynote? In other words, what are the advantages of using that presenter view? Well, for one thing, there's no need to print out your notes. You can see the next slide. You can even jump to a future slide or go backwards. What if you need to get to a specific slide, but it isn't in the sequence, and someone maybe asked you, "Can I see that previous slide?" or a certain slide comes to mind? What do most people do? Well, they scroll through all of their slides to get to it, or they hit the escape, and then they use their mouse in order to select it. It's better if you simply type in the number of the slide that you want and then press enter. If you need to do this, then it's good to make a numbered list of your slides. And what I like about the presenter view is that you can resize each of the windows, the window you're presently looking at and the one that's going to come up, and you can actually make the notes that you're going to read much larger. There is a way to use a Wi-Fi adapter with your iPhone or maybe with your iPad. That way you can download your PowerPoint onto an iPhone. Now think about that. All that you need to take in is an iPhone. And then with it, you use a Wi-Fi adapter. The one we used in Thailand was with an Epson digital projector. You just take your adapter and your iPhone, and you are ready to go. What about preaching from an iPad? You see lots of people doing that. Now, I suggest that you put your sermon manuscript onto Good Reader. That's an app, Good Reader, because that's one that's easy to swipe through, and it'd be good to use 16 to 18 size font. Be sure to charge your iPad first. I would encourage you to use a black backdrop with white letters. Be sure to turn off notifications, turn off the auto lock, and then you can manually lock the orientation page to portrait or landscape mode. But I encourage you to read from a printed Bible when it comes time to read from the Bible itself. Now, at first, I resisted using a wireless mic. And I felt like Madonna with that thing hanging over my ear. But being able to move around obviously improves your teaching. Yet most PowerPoint presenters are tied to a microphone stand, and they stand there for the entire hour that they're talking. Plus, they keep pushing a button on the laptop in order to forward their slides. For me, Samson's Airline Micro ear set is my choice. It's been very useful to me. Have you ever seen a screen projected in that way? That's very distracting, but there is a simple solution. Just learn to use the keystone correction tab on your digital projector to do that. We started out talking about how to prepare a beautiful basted turkey. I'm hoping that what we reviewed today will help your future PowerPoints to avoid Mr. Bean's type turkey presentation and give you the ability to produce a beautiful and delicious presentation like this one.